All right, so this is section 1.3 in your text, page 27. So if you want to turn to page 27 in your textbook, I would encourage you to have that open if there's room on your desk to have that open as we go through. There will be pictures, diagrams, even terms and charts and things that I won't have on the notes that you might want to refer to. That'll help fill in some of the blanks here. Of course, the notes that you have in front of you are just sort of like the highlights of this material. So I would encourage you, and even in grade 9, you need to hear this, that reading your textbook along with the notes the teachers give you is a very important way to have a deeper and more full knowledge of this stuff. So in my grade 12 chemistry classes and in my math classes and physics classes and all that sort of stuff, I do tell the students that, hey, listen, you need to be reading your textbook and doing some of your own studying on the subject outside of just the highlighted notes that I give you, because they're just the top kind of points. If that's all you memorize, you're not going to have a deep understanding. So I would encourage you to use the textbook wisely, to read through, take a look at the pictures, fill in some blanks that we maybe skip over a little quickly in class. Okay, so on page 27 is the introduction to sexual reproduction. We just got finished talking about asexual reproduction, okay, asexual, where there are not two parents that are needed to produce offspring, but only one. In the cases of plant life, a lot of plants, some insects, and even some reptiles. We talk about, and snakes and lizards and things like that. There is a way that cells can reproduce and organisms can reproduce without the mating of parents. But sexual reproduction is the area where plants and animals reproduce by the union of two sex cells. So we talked a little bit about this in the last lesson. Two sex cells, also called gametes. They are haploid type cells, right? There's diploid and haploid. Diploid has two sets of chromosomes. Haploid only has one set of chromosomes. They are ready to unite with another haploid cell. They're also called gametes. And I guess I got to get my blank notes out here so I can see what you need to fill in. The words are union and I believe gametes. Okay, so you can fill those in your blank notes there if you have them. To produce a new individual. So sex cells from the female are called eggs, okay, or ovum, I believe you'll see in different places of the textbook, but eggs, whereas sex cells from males are called sperm, okay. So you've heard these words before, but these are the sex cells that are the cells that are ready to be united to form an offspring in sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction has some advantages. Genetic diversity. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this yesterday. In one of the disadvantages of asexual reproduction is that often they're producing clones, just identical little miniature versions of themselves. There's not much in the genome or in the genetic information that's changing. But when you have sexual reproduction, there are two parents that are needed. And this produces a wide range of genetic diversity, which of course we'll talk a lot about, and you are very familiar with genetic diversity. But some of the disadvantages are that two parents are needed to form the individuals, and it's a relatively slow process. Asexual reproduction that we studied yesterday in plants and things like that can happen very quickly. This is often a slow process as a new individual is created from two different individuals. So let's just talk for a moment about hermaphrodites, okay? So this is going to be a question that comes up. It's in the textbook as well. Hermaphrodites, most animals have distinct sexes. Individuals are either male or female. Some organisms can produce both male and female gametes, okay? So in your blanks here, this hermaphrodites is the title there. Most animals have distinct sexes. Some organisms can produce both male and female gametes, okay? So again, by nature, there are other factors that would, produce, that the organism would be characterized sexually, not just the gametes it produces, but some organisms can produce both the male version and the female version of gametes. They are called hermaphrodites. Although hermaphrodites usually mate with other individuals of their species, in times of environmental stress, members of some species can fertilize themselves. So when they have the ability to produce both male and female gametes, then this is almost, it turns into a bit of an asexual reproduction sort of situation, although it is sexual reproduction in nature, okay? So again, you can do some more research on that, but it's sexual reproduction in nature, but the gametes, instead of coming from two parents, in some cases can come from one parent, okay? So you can, so that's hermaphrodites. All right, meiosis. We talked about mitosis, and unfortunately, the two words are very, very similar. Unfortunately, I say, because it's easy to get them mixed up. But on page 29, we learn about this process called meiosis. The role of gametes from male and female are to unite and form new diploid cells. That's the role, that's the purpose, that's the end game. And this is a process called fertilization, okay? So gametes from a male and from a female are to unite to form the complete diploid cells. Remember, these gametes are haploid cells, right? So the purpose is for a male haploid and a female haploid to come together to produce a diploid cell, okay? Fertilization. Offspring from sexual reproduction, where am I here? Usually have a mix of traits from both parents due to this combination of genetic material. All right. So you notice I grabbed this picture off the internet. You know what? Here you go. You see this, right? So obviously this guy here has some very different traits from this lady over here. And it appears that they are a family, and it appears that they have produced these two children. And you know what? We're just making straight observations about how this works. This is a wonderfully complex and diverse situation that we have here. This is where genetic diversity comes into the population. And yeah, you may know families like this where the characteristics are very different in obvious ways. And you know, the children have a nice mix of both parents. And this genetic information is woven into there in a very unique and special way. And yeah, this is the nature of sexual reproduction in adding diversity into the system here. So gametes are produced through a process called meiosis. Okay, so this is what meiosis is. It's the process in which gametes are produced. Mitosis and meiosis are very similar as they both go through interphase. So if you remember, interphase is sort of the longest portion of the cell cycle where it performs its regular functions. The difference is the complicated process where sex cells with only one set of chromosomes are produced. I feel like I'm missing part of that sentence. The difference in the interface is the complicated process where sex cells are created with only one set of chromosomes. Yeah, that's definitely an awkward sentence. I might have to fix that. Okay, so copying a cell is one thing, right? We learned in mitosis how difficult that is. You know, there's chromosomes that are duplicated, and then they're pulled to the sides of the cell, and then there's a new nuclear envelope, and the cytoplasm sort of splits in the middle, and we have this breaking apart, and all of a sudden there's two. But they're exact copies of themselves. Now, meiosis is where these special cells get created with only half the genetic information. That is incredible if you think about that. It's one thing for something to create a copy of itself, but it's another thing for an organism to create some cells that are very special for this process. The word I'm trying to think of is it's special for heredity. It's special for reproduction to pass this material on in a unique and diversified way into the next generation. This is unbelievable. This is obviously, in my mind, this is a very carefully planned process, and it's so complicated that this must have been something that has some purpose behind it. So I'm excited about that. This is just amazing. What are zygotes? What are embryos? Okay, so let's talk about some other terms that we might need to understand here. The joining of two gametes creates a new single cell called a zygote. I'm not sure if you've ever heard that term before. That's I think it's kind of a cool word, zygote. To me, it's like some kind of like sci-fi, a barnyard animal. I don't know. It's like an alien goat or something. I don't know. I don't know why I think of that. Think of a goat flying through space with a jetpack. Zygote. I don't know. That's random. The zygote has a full set. I don't know. The zygote has a full set of chromosomes and is the first cell of the new individual. So, two gametes. Remember, we've got gametes. They only have half the genetic information. So we have a half and a half. When those get together, we have the zygote over here. Number one, baby. The zygote has a full set of chromosomes for the new individual. Okay? Zygote. A single cell flying through space with a jetpack. As cells divide, the life form is called an embryo. So it's a bit fuzzy, okay? But the zygote is the first, boom. We have a full set of chromosomes. Now we're starting to roll here. And now cells are starting to divide and form this new life. At some point, it's called an embryo. Again, after 8 weeks, an embryo is technically referred to as a fetus. So these are all words that maybe you've heard of before, but maybe you're kind of unsure of how it all works together and what's called what. So what do we got? Embryo, fetus, okay? Most people realize it's a baby even before it's born. So you'll get into some discussions. Well, let's say, what else could it be? You'll get into some discussions, especially as we talk about, societal issues of abortion and things like that. There's a lot of debate on these words and what they mean. There's a lot of debate on when a person is a person. And I do have a little note here in your notes that these are important things to ask yourself, because this is a very, it's a very touchy societal issue, right? People have different views on the whole thing. But these are important questions to ask. When does life start? Okay, we can throw out these words like zygote and embryo and fetus, but what about life? When does life start? Is a baby alive? Is a fetus alive? Is an embryo alive? Is a zygote alive? Is a gamete alive? When does life begin is an important question to ask, and it has far-reaching consequences. Partly your worldview will inform the answers to these questions, but as we go back in time from where you are right now, from where you're sitting right now in grade 9, if we go back in time far enough to your birth, and a few seconds before your birth, and then a few weeks before your birth, a few months before your birth, approximately 9 months before your birth, where do we stop at calling you you? It's a good question, I think. And you know what? We won't discuss too much here in this class the answers to those questions, but these are questions, as you in grade 9, you have to start asking yourself. And your worldview obviously will play an important part in answering those questions. All right, sexual reproduction in plants. Let's talk about sexual. You probably didn't even know this. Did you guys even know this? Yeah, you'll never look at a plant the same way again. Oh, you dirty thing. Yeah, look at it. Okay, flowering plants are hermaphrodites. They can fertilize themselves or others. So remember we talked about hermaphrodites? Produce both the male and female gametes. Able to reproduce technically sexually. Well, no, not underground, not necessarily underground. Okay, so I have a picture for you here, but what I'm going to get you to do, I have a little note here. As part of your assignment for this section, I do want you to copy the diagram that's on page 31, because this one is given for you for the purposes of me just to kind of teach, but I want you to draw your own. But let's go over the parts here of a flower, and we'll talk about the male and female parts and how this all works. Pretty cool. So this is a dissected flower that is labeled a bit. It's a bit tough to see this maybe, but there are male structures and female structures in a flowering plant, a flower. So the anther is the male structure. Okay, so the stamen, the anther contains the pollen or the sperm. So let's see, on this diagram here, the anther, okay, these things right here are the anthers right here. So those parts of this diagram, and I wish I had the exact diagram that you're copying in your textbook, but they're very similar. There's a very similar diagram here, okay? So these are the anthers that contains the sperm or the male gametes. The filament is the male stalk, okay? So there's the stalk here, okay? That connects that. That's called the filament. And this together is the stamen. So the male part here, there's male parts there, those are the stamens. Okay? The female structure, okay, the pistil or carpel. The pistil or carpel. On this diagram, let's just see. Sepal. I'm not finding it here. So the pistil, I guess, is the okay, your diagram in your textbook is better. Oh, here we go. Over here on this side, right here. Okay, so look at the stigma over here. You see the stigma and the anthers, how they're different? Okay, the male part, the female part, right here, the stigma. It's a little bit easier to see in the diagram in the textbook here than this actual one, but these are different right here. Let me zoom in just a bit. So the stigma here, female part, the anther here is the male part, okay? So they're looking a little bit different. The stigma is has a sticky tip where pollen lands, okay? So the pollen is the male sperm, really. The pollen is the sperm. And the stigma is sticky, and it when the sperm kind of blows in the wind or whatever, it kind of floats around, it sticks onto there. The style is the female stalk, okay, just like the filament is the male stalk, the style is the female stalk. The ovary, okay, so in your diagram in your textbook, somewhere in the base here, again, it would be sort of in the... Yeah. In your diagram, it's easier. It's got a cross section in your diagram. So the ovary would be kind of at the base here in this part here. The ovules or the eggs, okay, develop into seed when fertilized and matures into fruit. Okay, so again, the male gametes and the female gametes meet here at the kind of in the ovary, I guess, and develops into seed if it's fertilized, and also matures into fruit. The petal is colored to attract pollinators. So what are pollinators? Well, when you have a hummingbird, or you have an insect, or you have a bee or something like that, and they are trying to get some pollen here as well, but in the action of them walking around and flying around here, they actually cause pollination here. They cause the anther and the pollen contained to touch the stigma, or to, they disrupt things so that there's this cloud of sperm in the air, and the stigma grabs onto it, and so pollinators would be little insects or bugs or whatever that crawl around and disrupt this and cause the pollination. The sepal, that's the leaves that cover and protect the flower bud. Okay, all right. So you have a slightly simplified diagram in your textbook that I think would be good for you to jot down. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that in your textbook, to jot that down into your paper there. As you finish up your diagram, I do want to add one thing. I'll get you to jot this down when you're done your diagram. But plants can self-pollinate, obviously, when the pollen is transferred from anther to stigma in the same flower. So obviously this can happen in the same flower. That's called self-pollination. More of the same will be produced. Cross-pollination occurs when pollen from one plant is carried to the stigma of another plant. Cross-pollination. So that's that little difference. And a lot of times plants grow together. Pollen is transferred to another plant, but it could be a very similar plant. But you may also get this genetic diversity if it's another slightly different plant, so that's the cross-pollination. So this is also called fertilization, of course, in plants. Self-fertilization, cross-pollination, pollination. I don't know why I want to say pollinization. Pollinization. I'm just inventing words over here. So when the gametes are formed, it's still called a zygote. The zygote produces an embryo, so the terms are the same there, which will eventually develop into a new individual plant. For most plants, the embryo is produced inside a protective covering known as the seed. The seed protects the embryo and stores food for the embryo to use when it begins to grow into a new individual. Yeah. The new embryo may not begin to form for some time, but stay dormant within the seed until growing conditions are favorable. A plant produced from cross-fertilization will show some of the characteristics from the parents that provides the female gamete, and some from the parents providing the male gamete. Yeah, it won't be identical to either parent. So that's where you get these hybrid plants. Plants of the same type of plants with different colored petals and different other characteristics like that through cross-pollination. I got some questions for you to do here on page 34 from 1.3. Comparing the process of mitosis and meiosis. What I want you to do is to take some time to draw a graphic organizer, so some kind of flow chart or a Venn diagram or something like that, that will help you understand the differences and the similarities between mitosis and meiosis. That's number one. Also, explain what happens to the chromosomes during cell division that produce both diploid and haploid cells. This one we didn't go over the process so much, but I want you to kind of look back into your text, and you can research online. There are diagrams in your text as well for the differences between meiosis and mitosis there. So diploid and haploid cells. Yeah, just kind of look a little further into diploid and haploid cells and how they're produced. Number 5 is a chart of number of chromosomes in different organisms, so I want you to research that. And number 7 says explain what happens to male and female gametes during sexual reproduction. Just a bit of summary of what we discussed here today. And then which type of reproduction, sexual or asexual, is responsible for an increased amount of genetic variation in plants and animals? Support your answer with examples. So again, just a summary of genetic diversity and how that's accomplished. So those are your questions. Go ahead, you have some time now to work on those.